There are hours when your thoughts move in a way that feels separate from everything else inside you. They drift with a quiet persistence, almost like they've found their own slow path, while the rest of you is still trying to settle. In this part of the night, something in you feels slightly brighter than your tired body, not sharp, not loud, just awake in a soft internal way. It's a kind of wakefulness that doesn't push, doesn't demand attention, but it's there shaping the way you sense yourself in this dim hour. A part of you might feel that gentle movement starting before you even notice it. It's subtle at first, almost weightless, like an inner shift that just wants a bit of space. There's no urgency in it, no intention. It simply moves because the night makes room for such things. And when your body begins to quiet, that small movement becomes easier to feel. Not more intense, just more visible, the way something soft can stand out more clearly when everything else goes still. In this late moment, the mind doesn't wait for permission to wander. It just wanders. It slips past the tiredness of your limbs and the heaviness of the day, moving with a faint clarity that only appears after the world has slowed down. You're not guiding it. You're not trying to stop it. You're simply aware of the fact that your thoughts are taking their own route, flowing ahead of the rest of you, as if this hour belonged more to them than to anything else. There's an inner rhythm here, a gentle one, not steady, not structured, but present. Your thoughts lean into that rhythm with a soft curiosity drifting a little farther each time before circling back to the quiet of this moment. They don't rush. They don't sharpen. They don't pull you away. They just move lightly and continuously, the way something inside you tends to move when nothing else is asking for your attention. Tonight, this wandering carries a different kind of softness. It isn't heavy. It isn't tangled. It isn't trying to become anything. It's just the natural motion of a mind that hasn't yet followed the body into rest. And maybe that feels familiar to you, this sense that your thoughts are a few steps ahead, walking through places inside you that only appear after dark, when the edges of the day have finally dissolved. You may notice how this wandering rises and falls without direction. Sometimes it feels like a small inward brightness, almost like a faint line of clarity running through a dim space. Other times it feels like a quiet pull inward, as if your mind wants to look at something it can't quite name. But it's all soft. It's all low. Nothing presses. Nothing insists. The night holds the motion without intensifying it, keeping everything gentle. There is something about these hours that makes even the smallest thought feel like it has more space. Not more weight, just more room to move. And because your body begins to loosen its hold, your mind slips into that space with ease, drifting without friction. It's not searching. It's not returning to anything. It's just moving the way the inner world tends to move when the external world has gone quiet. A part of you might feel this as a faint warmth too, not emotional, just the soft temperature of awareness opening slightly. It doesn't rise. It doesn't deepen. It simply exists as a subtle glow around your thoughts, the kind that lets them move without falling apart. This warmth isn't about comfort. It's more like the gentle illumination that happens when everything else dims, allowing small things inside you to come forward more clearly. And as you sense this movement, you may also feel how the body rests behind it. Not fully, not completely, but enough to create a gentle distance between thought and physical weight. It's as if the mind drifts just a little above the surface of your tiredness, untethered, but still quiet. That separation isn't abrupt. It isn't sharp. It's more like a soft unfastening that happens naturally when the day loses its hold. In these hours, your thoughts are allowed to wander without consequence. They don't have to anchor themselves. They don't have to explain their shape. They don't have to return to anything concrete. They move with a softness that belongs only to the night, touching the edges of your awareness, then drifting away again as though they're familiar with this terrain and know exactly how to navigate it. There is no need to contain them. There is no need to name them. The wandering itself is enough. And because the night carries its own kind of muted clarity, you find yourself simply noticing the movement without having to follow it, observing without engaging, feeling without holding, existing in that space where your mind moves one way and your body moves another, yet nothing feels out of place. This is the quiet threshold where interactivity becomes easier to sense, not because it grows stronger, but because everything else grows softer. The dimness helps. The stillness helps. The slow hour helps. They create a background gentle enough that even the faintest motion within you can be felt without strain. And as these thoughts continue their wandering, you remain here, aware, steady, not pulled, not drifted away, just present with a soft separation between where your body rests and where your mind continues to move. It's a calm kind of wakefulness, the kind that doesn't stir anything, doesn't press anything, doesn't deepen anything. It's simply a state the night allows. In this awareness, something begins to settle very lightly. Not a full settling, not a descent, just a soft recognition that this wandering is part of the quiet pattern of nights like this. It rises, it moves, it shifts, and it circles back all in its own rhythm. You don't need to adjust it. You don't need to shape it. You only notice that it's there moving a little faster than your tired body, moving in the gentle way the mind often moves after dark. And for now, that is enough, this quiet acknowledgement of an inner motion that simply exists, soft and unhurried, in the dim hours before everything slows. There's a moment in these late hours when your thoughts begin to move in longer lines, not sharper, not louder, just extended in a quiet way that feels different from earlier in the night. They slip into a slower pace, yet they travel farther, as if the dimness gives them permission to stretch without resistance. Your body remains in its own heaviness, but the mind keeps drifting, not in leaps, not in spirals, just in steady glides that don't disturb the stillness you're resting in. You might notice how each thought seems to travel just past the edge of where the previous one stopped. Not abruptly, not abruptly, but in a soft continuation that feels almost natural at this hour. They don't form a sequence. They don't connect into anything defined. They simply follow one another with a kind of muted ease, like quiet footsteps inside a hallway you're too tired to walk through yourself. Nothing about this movement pulls you outward. It doesn't open old things or stir new ones. It just keeps going in a gentle forward motion, as though the mind is exploring its own space without intending to reach any particular point. And because your body is resting in its own slow descent, the distance between physical stillness and mental wandering becomes slightly more noticeable. There's a subtle awareness that comes with this, not alertness, just a soft noticing. You sense the way your thoughts travel ahead of you, tracing faint paths that dissolve as soon as they finish forming. They don't leave marks. They don't leave weight. They simply pass through quiet and unheld. In these hours, the inner landscape feels wider than usual. Not brighter, not clearer, just more open. Your thoughts move across that openness without pressing into it, without shaping it, just gliding through in a way that feels steady and unforced. There's no need to direct them. There's no need to contain them. They know how to move in this silence without disturbing it. You may feel a mild shift in the way your awareness sits neither fully anchored nor drifting away. It remains right where it is steady, while the thoughts continue their wandering ahead. That separation isn't something you try to create. It just appears naturally as your body settles deeper into its own quiet, leaving more room for the mind to move at its own pace. As the night deepens, this motion becomes even more subtle. Each thought feels like a slow line drawn across a dim surface, fading before the next one appears. There's no pressure in it, no urgency. The movement doesn't ask you to follow. It doesn't ask you to interpret anything. It simply exists as a gentle rhythm inside the silence. Sometimes the thoughts drift a little farther, reaching into spaces you don't intentionally access during the day. But even then, they stay soft. They don't sharpen. They don't pull you toward anything specific. They just extend themselves lightly, then return to the quiet without leaving any trace. This is the kind of wandering that happens only when everything else has slowed down enough to create room for it. When the world is dim and the body is tired and nothing outside you is moving fast enough to influence the pace. In that stillness, your mind finds its own slow current, not purposeful, not searching, just naturally in motion. You notice this without holding on to it. You watch the thoughts drift farther than before, yet remain gentle. They don't step into anything uncomfortable. They don't reopen old corridors. They don't form stories or patterns. They're simply movements, small, quiet, and unhurried, taking place just ahead of where your body rests. There is a softness in allowing this, not a comfort, not a release, just a recognition that the mind sometimes needs space to move in the quietest way possible. And the night gives it that space without expectation, without intensity, without demanding that anything deepen or resolve. As the minutes pass, your thoughts begin to slow slightly. Not stop, just slow. Their lines become shorter. Their movement becomes lighter. The distance they travel ahead of you decreases in a way you can feel only faintly. It's a gradual shift, almost imperceptible, but present enough to sense. The body, still resting, begins to feel a little closer to the mind's pace. Not aligned, yet not joined, just a little nearer. The gap between thought and rest narrows a small amount, almost like two quiet currents drifting toward each other without touching. And as this happens, the wandering continues, but with a softer boundary. The thoughts move gently, but they stay nearer. They glide in smaller arcs, slower, calmer, as if preparing for the moment when they might settle fully. Not now, just eventually. For now, you remain in this in-between space, a mind drifting slightly ahead, a body resting slightly behind, and a quiet awareness that watches both without needing to change either. The night holds all of it in place, with an ease that feels almost effortless. And in that ease, everything continues to soften, slowly, steadily, without direction, simply following the natural pace of these hours when the mind wanders just a little faster than the body rests. There is a point in these hours when the movement of your thoughts begins to change again, not by becoming heavier or clearer, but by settling into a quieter kind of wandering. They don't travel as far ahead as before. They don't drift with the same length or reach. Instead, they start forming shorter motions, slow curves, rather than long lines, as if the mind is beginning to recognize the pace your body is resting in. Nothing about this shift is sudden. It's almost too soft to notice at first. You sense it only through the way each thought appears, with a gentler weight, rests for a moment longer, then moves on without pushing forward. The rhythm becomes less stretched, less extended, still wandering, but with a faint gravity that wasn't there earlier. Your awareness sits in an unusual balance here. It observes without fully engaging, stays steady without drifting away, holds the quiet without shaping it. You feel the thoughts slide across the surface of the night in smaller motions, almost like they're conserving some unspoken energy. Not out of fatigue, just a natural slowing that arrives when the mind begins easing itself toward rest. The space inside you feels the same, yet different. It's still open, still dim, still gentle, but the openness feels closer now. Not wider, closer, as if the inner distance has contracted slightly, making the wandering feel more contained. Your thoughts move through this smaller space with a kind of calm acceptance, no longer searching the farther edges of your awareness. They stay near, gliding in loops that stay within a short reach of where you're resting. In these hours, your mind begins to echo the quietness of your body. Not match it, not merge with it, just echo it. There's a soft resonance in how your thoughts begin to align slowly with the stillness beneath them. The movement becomes less like a separate path and more like a gentle reflection of something deeper inside you, slowly settling. This part of the night has its own kind of neutrality. Not emptiness, not clarity, just neutral space, like a muted field where thoughts can move without disturbing anything. Every motion feels like it lands on a softer surface, so even when they touch old or familiar places, they don't stir anything. They just pass through muted and harmless. Sometimes, a thought might appear with a bit more shape than the others. It might hold a faint outline of something from earlier in the day, or something unfinished somewhere inside you. But even then, the night's softness wraps around it, removing edges, dissolving any tendency for it to expand. It stays small, contained, and then drifts away before forming anything defined. You may sense how each thought now ends closer to where it began. The arcs they travel shrink slightly with each new motion. You don't force this. You don't guide the drifting. The night does it naturally, steadily drawing your mind toward a quieter center. There's nothing to chase, nothing to follow, nothing to interpret, just the slow contraction of movement, drawing the mind inward by a fraction. Your body remains in its own heaviness, but that heaviness begins to feel less distant than before. Not because your mind slows completely, but because the slight gap between mind wandering and bodily rest narrows another small amount. The two currents move a little nearer, both remaining gentle, both keeping their own pace, yet gradually approaching a subtle point of meeting. This approach is delicate, almost unnoticeable, a barely perceptible alignment. It doesn't feel like a merging, And it isn't a surrender into anything deeper. It's simply the natural point in these hours when the drifting mind begins to recognize the rhythm of the resting body. Not enough to follow it entirely, just enough to acknowledge its presence. The wandering continues, but the distance has shortened. The movement has softened. The internal brightness has dimmed to a quiet glow. Thoughts appear, like small ripples rise faintly, then settle almost immediately. Not because the mind grows tired, but because the night gently reduces the pace, like a soft hand on the movement inside you. Your awareness stays steady through all of this. Clear, but not alert. Soft, but not fading. It holds the space where thoughts drift without attaching to them, letting each motion pass through without deepening. That steadiness creates a kind of internal weightlessness, not emptiness, just a lightness in the way everything moves inside you. There is something calming in this stage of wandering, not soothing, not tender, just calm, in the purest sense, a calm that doesn't try to relax you or guide you, a calm that simply exists because the night has reached a deeper stillness. The world outside has hushed enough that even your inner world responds by slowing itself without needing direction. Your thoughts drift in small looping motions. They no longer stretch outward. They no longer explore distant corners. They remain close, circling, dissolving, reforming in quieter shapes. Each motion arrives, hovers briefly, then fades in a way that feels increasingly effortless. And as this continues, you sense the beginning of a slow descent, not into sleep, not into depth, but into a gentler layer of the night. A place where the mind no longer wanders to escape the pace of the body, but wanders because the body has made enough room for it to move comfortably within a smaller, quieter space. This is where settling begins. Not fully, not immediately, but faintly, like the first moment when two rhythms begin to notice one another. The drifting mind moves a bit more slowly. The resting body feels a bit nearer. Your awareness sits quietly between them, watching without shaping anything. And in that subtle alignment, the night deepens a little more inside you. The movement of your thoughts now feels even shorter, almost like each one forms and dissolves before it can stretch into anything wider. They arrive in softened fragments, drifting only a small distance before settling back into the quiet. It isn't a reduction. It isn't a dimming. It's simply the mind adjusting to the deeper stillness of this hour, easing its pace to match the subtle weight that your body has already settled into. There's a kind of closeness in this stage, not emotional, not reflective, just spatial in an inner sense. Your thoughts stay near. They rise, gently hover, and fall away without creating any momentum. They don't build. They don't echo. They move with an almost fragile rhythm, like something floating lightly in a space where nothing pushes against it. Your awareness remains stable, but it feels different now. It sits closer to the motion of your thoughts, as though the distance between noticing and drifting has narrowed to a thin line. You perceive each shift in real time, not because the thoughts are louder, but because they happen nearer to the point where your attention rests. Everything feels contained, quiet, immediate. The night influences this. As the minutes slide deeper, the stillness around you becomes denser in a gentle way, almost like a natural insulation that dampens the reach of every inner movement. When your thoughts attempt to wander even a little farther, the dimness catches them, encouraging them to stay close without forcing them to stop. It is an effortless restraint, a soft boundary that feels more like a natural condition than a limit. You may notice a slight heaviness forming around your awareness too, not the heaviness of sleep, but the heaviness of settling. It slows the pace at which you register each thought, creating a faint drag in the way your mind moves. This drag isn't intrusive. It adds a layer of quiet weight that helps the wandering thoughts shift from motion into something calmer, smaller, and less extended. Each thought now feels like a single slow breath, appearing lingering, then dissolving, without forming lines or patterns. The loops from earlier in the night have compressed, becoming gentle pulses instead of arcs. The mind is no longer gliding, it is gently hovering, and the body, still resting in its own depth, begins to feel naturally aligned with this hover. Your inner landscape feels smaller now. The expansiveness from earlier has faded into a closer, more concentrated space. Thoughts move inside this smaller space with care, not because anything is fragile, but because the night itself is guiding everything toward a quieter center. The openness remains, but the distance within it is shorter. The wandering remains, but its steps are softer. Sometimes a thought drifts slightly outward, almost testing the quiet boundary that surrounds it. But even then, it turns back almost instantly, folding into the stillness without creating ripples. The night allows only small motions here. It supports the wandering, but it holds it close, ensuring nothing becomes too wide, too extended, or too sharp for the softness of this hour. There is a peaceful neutrality in this stage. Not warm, not cold, not emotional, just neutral in a way that feels steady and uncomplicated. Your thoughts exist without needing context. They appear without needing form. They dissolve without leaving residue. Everything moves in clean, faint motions that don't disturb the quietness growing inside you. As the thoughts continue drifting in these smaller shapes, your body feels even closer to them. The separation between mind and rest narrows further. The mind still leads, but only by a small distance, not the stretched gap from earlier, but a gentle offset, like two quiet rhythms moving nearly in sync. Your awareness sits right at the point where these rhythms approach each other. You can sense both at once, the soft weight of your body settling downward and the subtle drift of your thoughts hovering just above it. Neither dominates, neither fades. They coexist in a balance that feels almost fragile in its delicacy, yet stable in its stillness. In these moments, the wandering thoughts start to show signs of slowing, not through length or distance, but through frequency. They arrive more slowly now. Each one takes longer to form. The pauses between them widen slightly, creating small pockets of quiet that feel deeper than before. These pockets aren't empty, they simply lack motion. And in their lack of motion, they create a gentle grounding inside you. Nothing about this grounding pulls you down. It doesn't signal any descent. It's more like an internal settling, a soft realignment, where movement becomes secondary to quiet presence. Your thoughts don't resist this. They follow the pace, naturally drifting less frequently, hovering shorter, dissolving sooner. The night, in return, deepens itself around you, shaping the internal quiet into something smoother and more contained. Each motion inside you becomes part of that shaping, forming a low, slow pattern of drifting and resting. The drifting grows lighter. The resting grows closer. Your mind remains awake, but softly so. Your body remains heavy, but gently so. Awareness holds both with the same lightness, not choosing between them, simply existing beside them. And as these softened motions continue, you feel the quiet beginning to settle through you with more clarity, not as a destination, not as a release, but as the natural next shape of the night. The quiet between your thoughts grows a little wider now, not empty, but gently stretched, like the mind is giving itself more room to rest between each small movement. The drifting doesn't disappear. It simply slows into something softer, quieter, less frequent. Each thought forms with a mild hesitation, almost as if it's checking whether it's necessary to move at all before it begins to wander. This hesitation isn't resistance. It isn't fatigue. It's the natural shift that happens when the mind edges closer to the body's pace. Your thoughts still hover, still rise, still move in faint patterns, but the shapes they take are lighter, thinner, almost translucent in the way they pass. They appear briefly, hang in the calm air of your awareness, then dissolve with a smoothness that feels different from the earlier drifting. Your awareness feels slightly heavier now, but not in a way that burdens you. It's the heaviness of settling a grounding that doesn't pull you downward, but steadies the space inside you. It places your attention closer to where your body rests, narrowing the distance between internal movement and physical quiet. This narrowing isn't sudden. It happens in a slow, unnoticed slide, like two quiet currents approaching the same direction without intersecting. The night around you feels fuller too, as if its stillness has thickened by a small degree. There's a low, steady silence that absorbs any sharpness before it forms, smoothing out the edges of each thought before it drifts. You don't have to soften anything yourself. The hour does it for you. The darkness, the quiet, the absence of external motion. They all create a gentle filter around your mind's movement, reducing its reach without diminishing its presence. As your thoughts drift through this softened space, they seem to grow rounder, smaller, less defined. They don't travel in lines anymore. They don't stretch into arcs. They drift like slow, shallow waves that barely rise before falling back into stillness. Every motion feels temporary light and unpressured. Nothing tries to form meaning. Nothing tries to hold your attention. Everything simply happens and then fades. Your body, in its quiet descent, begins to feel more synchronized with this lighter pace. The weight in your limbs, the slow settling of your breath, the subdued rhythm inside you, they all shape a backdrop that encourages your thoughts to move less. Not because they can't, but because they no longer need to. The wandering isn't driven by distance anymore. It's driven by presence, momentary, small, and unhurried. There are pauses now that last long enough for you to notice their shape. They aren't silence. They are simply intervals with no movement. In those intervals, your awareness feels clean, clear, and gently suspended. There's nothing to follow, nothing to anticipate, nothing drifting across your inner field. Just an uncomplicated stillness that sits quietly without deepening or retreating. When a thought finally does appear, it feels softer than before, as though it has adapted to the quiet rather than trying to move against it. It drifts a small amount, maybe only a few internal steps, then dissolves again. No pull, no push, no draw. Only a light motion that respects the stillness surrounding it. This kind of wandering has no direction, no intention, just a faint pattern of appearing and fading that repeats in slow, irregular intervals. Your awareness becomes attuned to these intervals, not engaged, not analyzing, just noticing the slight rhythm of presence and absence. It sits closer to your body's rest, but still maintains enough openness to observe the mind's soft movement. The balance between the two feels more even now, not aligned, not merged, but loosely parallel, like two quiet lines drifting closer without touching. The inner landscape, which once felt wide, now feels gently enclosed, not confined, not restricted, just contained in a way that supports stillness. Your thoughts stay comfortably within this contained space, drifting with a softness that matches the deeper quiet forming inside you. They no longer explore distant corners. They remain close, floating just above the surface of your awareness. Sometimes a thought lingers a little longer than the rest, not because it has weight, but because it holds a faint imprint of something familiar. But even that fades without expanding. The night refuses to let anything sharpen. It smooths every outline before it can form, encouraging everything inside you to remain light, brief, and unintrusive. As more minutes pass, you sense another subtle shift, not downward, not inward, but quieter. The frequency of drifting slows. The pauses widen. The internal movements become almost indistinct, as though your mind is gently settling into a place where wandering takes less space. It's not the beginning of sleep. It's not the end of wakefulness. It's the soft middle ground where the mind begins preparing itself for stillness simply by reducing its own pace. No effort, no influence, just a natural drift into smaller motions. Your body remains heavy and grounded. Your awareness remains steady and calm. And your thoughts continue wandering, but only in small, brief appearances that dissolve almost as quickly as they form. In this stage, the quiet grows more noticeable. It doesn't deepen. It simply becomes clearer, easier to feel, easier to rest within. And as your thoughts drift less and settle more, the night moves with you, lowering its own movement to match the gentle rhythm inside. The drifting inside you has thinned into something almost weightless now. Each thought appears with a faint outline, moves only a little, then dissolves before it can gather momentum. The night holds everything in a soft suspension, and your mind responds by reducing its own motion to the barest traces. Nothing expands. Nothing travels far. Everything moves in restrained, quiet circles that fade almost as soon as they form. The pauses between these small motions have grown wider. They aren't empty, and they aren't silent. They're simply spaces where nothing needs to happen. Your awareness rests inside these pauses with a smooth steadiness, not pulled forward, not drifting backward, just held gently between one faint motion and the next. Even the act of noticing feels slower, softer, slightly delayed, as though awareness is cushioned within the quiet. Your body continues its slow descent into stillness, and the mind begins to mirror that descent without fully committing to it. There's a gentleness in the way your thoughts adjust to the pace of your breathing, matching its rhythm in small, almost imperceptible ways. Each thought arrives like a soft exhale, drifts lightly, then fades before the next inhale completes. No tension, no resistance, just a gradual alignment. The inner space around you feels different now, close, dim, and softened at the edges. The openness from earlier has folded into something more compact, a smaller internal environment where everything feels muted and near. Your thoughts don't push against the edges of this space. They stay comfortably inside it, drifting without stretching. The night has shaped the inner boundaries for you, and the mind simply accepts them. When a thought appears, it feels as though it rises from the same depth your body is resting in. There's no upward sweep, no outward motion. It forms close to the surface of your awareness, moves slightly, then dissolves into the same quiet it emerged from. The dissolution happens smoothly, without collapse, without interruption, a clean fading that leaves no trace behind. The intervals between these thoughts deepen with a subtle weight. Not heavy, not pressing, just dense enough to feel like the air inside you has thickened a little. Your awareness floats within this density without sinking, without resisting, simply adjusting to the slow rhythm created by the widening pauses. It's a natural drift into quieter mental territory, not driven by tiredness, but by the night's gradual shaping of your inner movement. Your thoughts now seem to prefer stillness over motion. They appear reluctantly, with reduced brightness, as if checking whether they're needed before they commit to forming. And when they do form, they move with an almost ceremonial slowness, completing their faint motion before slipping away. This kind of drifting doesn't resemble thinking anymore. It feels more like gentle internal gestures, brief light, and without intention. You become aware of the way your attention moves too. It no longer follows each drifting thought. It simply acknowledges them from a close distance, then returns to the pause without effort. This creates a soft layer of separation inside you, a quiet awareness resting slightly above a quieter mind. The two move independently, but remain comfortably aligned like overlapping currents, neither disturbing the other. The body's heaviness continues deepening in a gentle way. The deeper it settles, the less your thoughts try to rise. They respond to the downward pull, not by falling, but by reducing their height, drifting closer to where your physical stillness resides. The gap between them narrows to something small and easy, not merging, not blending, just gently touching at the edges. Sometimes a thought comes with a faint texture, a soft echo of something earlier in the day, or something familiar within you. But even these textures dissolve before forming shape. They have no weight in this hour. The night smooths them before they can influence anything. You don't have to do anything. The smoothing happens automatically as part of the natural quiet you've entered. The stillness grows deeper, but without pulling you downward. It's more like a thickening of the quiet around you, making motion feel unnecessary, even unnatural. Your thoughts adapt to this slowing, even further appearing in short fragments that hover momentarily before disappearing. The fragments grow lighter. The hovering grows shorter. The dissolution grows quicker. You feel the soft beginning of a new rhythm, slower than before, quieter than before, almost like the internal equivalent of a slow tide withdrawing. The mind drifts outward less and less, preferring to remain near the center where your body rests. Everything moves toward stillness, but not through surrender, through gentle approximation. Awareness, mind and body, now hover in a loose alignment. None of them fully overlap, but all three sit closer than they have at any point tonight. The drifting thoughts appear as tiny pulses now small and contained, arriving with long spaces between them. And in those spaces, your awareness rests in a quiet that feels steady, neutral, and smooth. There's no narrative here, no pull toward sleep, no effort to quiet the mind. This is simply the shape of the night. At this hour, a natural reduction of motion, a soft narrowing of wandering, an almost instinctive shift toward internal calm. Your thoughts continue to drift, but their drifting is faint, brief, and close. They no longer lead. They no longer explore. They simply appear as soft points of motion inside a widening field of stillness. And as this gentle pattern repeats, you feel yourself settling even deeper into the quiet that the night has been guiding you toward, a quiet that doesn't lower you, doesn't engulf you, but surrounds you with an ease that carries the next stage of stillness in its slow, careful rhythm. The pauses inside you widen even further, now stretching into gentle spans of stillness that feel steady and effortless. Each thought that rises does so lightly, as if unsure whether to appear at all. They drift in small, slow motions, then settle almost immediately, leaving behind a quiet that grows thicker with each passing minute. Nothing inside you moves with urgency. Nothing tries to expand. Everything follows the softened pace shaped by the deepening night. Your awareness feels softer too, not dim, not fading, just more diffused. It spreads lightly across the inner space without focusing on any particular point. Even noticing takes on a slower texture, like the mind acknowledges each motion a moment after it occurs. There's no need to keep up. There's nothing to follow. The space between thoughts has become wide enough that awareness rests comfortably in the stillness without drifting. Your body continues sinking into its own quiet rhythm. The heaviness that has been building now feels steady, settled, and naturally grounded. Each breath moves in a slow, unhurried pattern, and your mind begins to drift in parallel, adjusting its rhythm to match the body's deeper rest. The alignment isn't complete, but the distance between the two narrows steadily, almost invisibly. Inside this smaller inner landscape, every motion becomes faint. Thoughts rise like thin lines, barely reaching beyond where they begin. They hover briefly, then dissolve back into the quiet without forming any structure. The mind no longer explores. It simply observes its own gentle motions. The drifting has become a subtle echo rather than a movement. Sometimes a thought arrives with a slight echo of feeling, but even that echo is muted before it can shape anything. The night does the smoothing for you, ensuring that every internal motion remains light and contained. Nothing expands into memory. Nothing unfolds into reflection. Everything stays soft, immediate, and close. As the drifting slows further, the pauses begin to feel more stable. They hold a faint depth now, not emotional, not contemplative, just a depth of stillness where awareness can rest without pressure. In these pauses, the mind doesn't reach outward or downward. It simply settles in place, held gently by the quiet around it. Your thoughts continue to appear, but they do so with longer intervals between them. The shapes they take are minimal, often no more than a faint impression before they dissolve. Each appearance feels like a small ripple across an otherwise calm surface, and each ripple fades cleanly, returning everything to stillness with ease. Your awareness begins to sense the subtle shift toward an even quieter internal rhythm. It's not sleep. It's not drowsiness. It's the mind preparing to settle more deeply by reducing its own motion. The drifting becomes an occasional flicker rather than a continuous movement, and the body's quiet heaviness becomes the primary sensation holding you. In this softened space, the distinction between mind and body narrows into something gentle. They don't merge, but they begin to move in a parallel descent. The thoughts drift slowly downward in their frequency. The body settles downward in its steadiness, and awareness sits calmly between the two, observing without effort, guiding nothing. There is a neutrality in this stage that feels different from earlier. It's not the neutrality of emptiness, but the neutrality of quiet balance, where nothing weighs more than anything else, and everything exists in the same soft layer. Your thoughts are neither important nor intrusive. They simply exist in brief light motions that dissolve before forming any direction. The inner space has become so quiet that even the smallest motion feels gentle. Your attention rests in the stillness without gripping it. Your breath creates a soft internal rhythm that shapes how each thought appears. The night continues to fold itself around you, encouraging everything within to soften, reduce, and settle. And as each minute passes, the drifting thoughts become fewer, lighter, and closer to the body's resting pace. They no longer wander. They no longer extend. They simply rise as small signals of wakefulness, then slip away as naturally as they came. In this stage, the quiet has its own presence, steady, dim, and almost warm in its stillness. It doesn't invite you anywhere. It doesn't guide you toward anything. It simply holds the space where your mind and body move gently toward a deeper alignment. Your thoughts hover as faint pulses, now separated by wide spans of calm. Awareness sits lightly above them, unhurried and unburdened. The body rests beneath with a steady weight that anchors everything without pulling anything down. This is where the night's quiet becomes unmistakable, not heavy, not deep, just unmistakably present. A quiet that shapes the mind's motion, slows its rhythm, and prepares it for the next layer of stillness without demanding any shift. And in this low, soft rhythm, you drift gently into the next stage of the night. The stillness inside you expands into a low, continuous field, now not deep, not heavy, just steady, in a way that makes every small motion of the mind feel distant and quiet. Thoughts rise with a thinner outline than before, almost translucent in the way they appear. They drift only a short distance, then flatten into silence without leaving anything behind. The pauses between them have become long enough that the absence of motion feels like the natural state of this hour. Your awareness rests inside this widening pause with a gentle looseness. It doesn't sharpen, and it doesn't fade. It simply spreads lightly, drifting just above the quiet without needing to focus on anything. Even when a thought appears, awareness touches it softly, then lets it go without following. There is no friction, no effort, only a smooth shift back into stillness. Your body feels fully grounded, but not heavy in a way that pulls downward. The weight is steady, balanced, and consistent, a calm foundation that supports the quiet happening inside you. Each breath moves slowly, shaping a rhythm that your thoughts begin to imitate. They appear in small pulses that align with this rhythm, almost as if the mind is borrowing the body's pace to adjust its own movement. Inside this quieter space, your thoughts lose the last traces of wandering. They don't travel, they don't explore, they don't stretch. They rise as small points flicker briefly, then return to the calm that now fills most of your inner landscape. Their presence feels optional, almost unnecessary, as though the mind has decided that motion is no longer needed to hold itself awake. The stillness around them has grown thicker, not heavier, just fuller, like the air in the room of your awareness has settled into a smooth equilibrium. Nothing inside you feels divided. Nothing feels misaligned. The body's rest, the mind's slowed drift, and the awareness that watches them all exist within the same quiet, steady layer. Occasionally, a thought might try to form with a bit more shape, but even that shape softens immediately. The night doesn't allow anything to gain momentum here. It smooths the edges before they can take form, dissolving the thought back into neutrality. The smoothing doesn't feel like correction. It feels like the natural texture of this hour. The intervals between drifting thoughts widen even more. They no longer feel like spaces between thoughts. They feel like the primary terrain, with thoughts appearing only as brief interruptions in the quiet. And even those interruptions are faint small enough that they barely register before dissolving again. In these extended spans of stillness, you might sense a gentle lowering of your awareness, not a descent, not a drop, but a slow settling into a closer alignment with your resting body. The separation from earlier in the night feels nearly gone. Mind and body aren't moving at the same pace yet, but they hover near each other, moving in quiet parallel currents. Your breath becomes the most stable rhythm inside you. The mind begins to echo that rhythm with slow, delayed motions that match its rise and fall. Every thought that appears seems tied loosely to this pattern, drifting in on the inhale and dissolving on the exhale. It's not a technique, not a focus, simply the way the mind responds to the quiet when nothing else is moving. Your awareness feels closer to the body than to the drifting thoughts now. It rests lower, steadier, more anchored in the physical quiet than in the mental motion. The thoughts that do appear seem to rise above this anchored awareness, forming briefly at a higher layer before dissolving and leaving the anchored layer untouched. There is a point in these hours when even the drifting feels like it is preparing to rest. You have reached that point. The thoughts that once wandered, then hovered, then flickered, now appear as small, slow pulses, mere signs that the mind is still awake, not signals of anything that needs to move. The quiet holds everything with a softness that feels complete, but not final. The night is not guiding you downward. It is guiding you inward into a space where movement naturally minimizes itself. The drifting isn't ending. It's reducing itself to the smallest necessary gesture of wakefulness. Your awareness stays calm, lightly tethered to the resting body, watching the faint motions of the mind without being pulled into them. Nothing inside you leans forward. Nothing pulls back. Everything holds its place in the smooth, dim equilibrium that this hour creates. The thoughts continue to drift, but only as small points of motion inside a field of stillness that now feels continuous and uninterrupted. They appear, slowly dissolve quickly, and leave behind a deeper quiet each time. And as you rest in this widening quiet, you feel the night preparing you for the next stage, not by pulling you there, but by making stillness the natural shape of your inner world. The stillness inside you has become the dominant space now. Thoughts appear so softly that they barely form before dissolving again, leaving long, uninterrupted stretches of quiet behind them. These stretches don't feel empty. They feel full in a calm, balanced way, as though the night has filled the inner landscape with a smooth, even layer of stillness that supports every part of you without pressing on anything. Your awareness rests lightly on this stillness. It doesn't concentrate. It doesn't drift. It simply sits in a gentle equilibrium, unpulled by anything, untouched by the faint motions that still rise from deeper inside. Even when a thought surfaces, awareness acknowledges it with a soft touch, then returns to the quiet without needing to follow its motion. Your body feels deeply settled now, not heavy in a dragging way, but heavy in a quiet, grounded sense, stable calm, and steady beneath the softer movement of your thoughts. Your breath flows in slow, easy cycles that shape the internal rhythm. Each inhale lifts slightly, each exhale settles gently, and your thoughts echo this pattern, rising and falling in small motions that match the slow wave of your breathing. Inside this quieter space, everything is narrowed down to the smallest possible motions. Thoughts appear like faint ripples, thin, fragile outlines that drift only a moment before fading. These ripples don't disturb anything. They don't ripple outward. They register and dissolve so smoothly that they feel like small, natural variations within the quiet rather than changes to it. There's a softness to this stage of drifting, not softness as comfort, not softness as warmth, softness as reduced motion. The mind doesn't try to wander. It doesn't try to explore. It simply produces small signals of wakefulness that hover, flatten, and fade. Every motion is quiet. Every transition is smooth. Every pause is deep but unforced. You may feel a mild sensation of lowering, not sinking, not dropping, but lowering. Awareness drifts slightly closer to the resting body, like it is adapting to the heavier rhythm beneath it. It doesn't feel like descent. It feels like alignment, like two layers of you are gradually moving toward the same slow pace without blending together. The night shapes this process for you. The quiet has thickened around your inner world, and any motion that tries to stretch beyond the immediate space is absorbed instantly. Thoughts cannot carry themselves far in such dense stillness. The quiet pulls them back, not forcefully, but naturally, in the same way a soft surface absorbs sound. The mind accepts this without resistance. It simply moves less, and in moving less, it remains closer to where the body rests. Occasionally, you may sense a thought with a bit more texture and unfinished detail. From earlier in the day, a sensation faintly remembered, a subtle recognition of something familiar. But even these textured thoughts lose their edges immediately. They flatten before they can expand, dissolving into the quiet the moment they form. Nothing sharp remains. Nothing expands into direction. The pauses between thoughts have grown long enough that you begin to feel the quiet as the primary state rather than the drifting. The thoughts appear as brief exceptions within the stillness, small and fleeting, while the quiet holds everything together. In these pauses, there is a faint suspension, as though the inner world is holding its breath, without tension, without waiting, just maintaining a steady neutrality. Your awareness becomes lightly anchored during these pauses. It sits closer to the resting body than to the drifting thoughts. The sensation of the body's stillness, its weight, its warmth, its slow rhythm becomes the backdrop over which the mind occasionally moves. This sensation doesn't pull you downward. It simply steadies the space you inhabit. When a thought does appear, it rises lightly, moves a small distance, then returns to the anchored layer without disturbance. These motions feel predictable now, following the same slow pattern each time appear, hover, dissolve, rest. And with each repetition, the quiet expands its hold, taking up more space inside you. The internal landscape has become very small, very close. There are no far edges. There is no distant drifting. Everything stays within a short radius of your awareness. Even your breath feels closer, as though its rhythm is happening directly against the quiet rather than beneath it. This proximity creates a sense of gentle containment, not confined, not restricted, just naturally held within a smaller range of motion. The drifting thoughts have thinned into near still pulses now. They no longer glide. They no longer linger. They simply appear as brief markers of wakefulness, each one softer than the last. Their presence doesn't disrupt anything. Their absence doesn't create emptiness. They exist only as faint signals that the mind is still awake in a reduced quiet state. Your awareness hovers in a place where it no longer feels like it's watching from above. It feels integrated with the stillness, not absorbed, not dissolved, but intertwined in a way that does not require effort. It rests where the mind and body meet at the soft threshold where motion reduces itself into the simplest possible form. There is a gentle quiet forming underneath everything, now a quiet that doesn't pull you deeper, doesn't push you outward, doesn't alter your state. It simply becomes the dominant texture of the moment. And as the drifting thoughts continue to reduce themselves into smaller and smaller motions, this quiet grows more complete without becoming heavy. Your mind lingers here, producing only faint patterns of motion, each one disappearing into a wider field of stillness that has settled over your inner world. Nothing presses, nothing pulls, nothing expands. Everything rests in a slow, quiet equilibrium. And in this smooth equilibrium, you feel yourself approaching the next layer of the night one, where motion becomes even lighter, and stillness becomes the natural ground beneath every breath and every faint drift of thought. The quiet inside you has settled into something almost continuous now. Thoughts rise so lightly that they feel more like impressions than movements, brief outlines that appear without shape and fade before they can become anything larger. The stillness between them stretches into long, smooth intervals that hold your awareness in a steady, unbroken calm. Nothing tries to form. Nothing tries to wander. Everything remains close, faint, and contained. Your awareness sits low in this quiet, not heavy, not sinking, just lightly anchored, as though it has found a comfortable position near the resting body without needing to adjust. Even noticing has slowed. You register each faint motion with a soft delay, as if the mind has shifted from reacting to simply acknowledging. It's a calmer way of being awake, where the internal rhythm matches the deeper quiet of the night. Your body feels fully grounded in its stillness. The weight is even steady and without tension. Breath moves through you in slow, settled cycles, creating a gentle rhythm that the mind echoes automatically. Each inhale lifts slightly, each exhale lowers a little more, and the mind follows with tiny muted pulses of motion that begin and end in sync with your breathing. Inside this dim inner space, motion has become optional. Thoughts rise only when they need to signal their presence, and even then, they do so with minimal form. They drift for a moment, then dissolve so quietly that you can't trace where they went. There is no residue, no expansion, no attempt to create direction. Only the simplest, smallest gesture of movement, and then a smooth return to quiet. The stillness surrounding all of this is thicker than before. It fills every inner corner, creating a consistent texture that softens anything that tries to move through it. Even thoughts with slight texture, faint reminders, half-formed images, small familiar impressions flatten as soon as they appear. The quiet doesn't suppress them. It simply absorbs them into its softness before they can take shape. This creates a kind of neutrality that feels complete, not empty, not blank, just neutral in the way a calm surface remains undisturbed even when something touches it lightly. Your awareness rests on this neutral surface, with ease no longer distinguishing between body and mind as separate rhythms. Everything feels like one gentle field of stillness, with occasional soft ripples that barely register. The pauses between those ripples grow longer. You may find yourself noticing the quiet more than the thoughts, the way it holds its own shape, the way it stays balanced, the way it doesn't fluctuate. In those longer pauses, awareness feels almost suspended, lightly floating in a space where nothing is required of you. When a thought does rise, it feels small, a thin moment of motion that barely lifts above the resting body. It doesn't travel. It doesn't stretch. It doesn't return with any force. It simply flickers and disappears, leaving the stillness unchanged. The drifting that once characterized your mind has reduced itself to these faint pulses, each one a simple sign of wakefulness, rather than a movement toward anywhere. Your awareness stays steady through this. It doesn't lean toward the pulse. It doesn't follow it. It doesn't anticipate the next one. Instead, it seems to settle more deeply into the mid-layer between mind and body, the place where both are quiet enough that you can sense their rhythms without needing to engage with either. The body's quiet is now the most prominent sensation. Its weight, its temperature, the slow rhythm of breathing, all of these form a stable foundation that gently influences the mind's pace. The mind begins to match this pace more fully, reducing its movement even further. The drifting thoughts appear, less often stay shorter, and dissolve faster, as though they've nearly completed their slow approximation towards stillness. Inside this near-still landscape, the night feels closer. Not darker, not heavier, just closer, like the external quiet has merged with the internal quiet. There are no edges to the inner space now. Everything feels held within the same soft boundary. The drifting thoughts rise inside this boundary without disturbing it, like small motions inside a vast, steady calm. You may feel a faint sensation of lowering again. Not descending, but lowering the awareness, settling a little closer to the resting body, easing itself into the heaviness without surrendering to it. This lowering feels natural, unforced, almost inevitable in the way it aligns with the deeper quiet forming inside you. The thoughts that appear now feel like they belong to this slower layer, thin, brief, nearly transparent. They rise, drift a fraction, and vanish. Their vanishing feels smoother than their rising, as though dissolution is their easiest motion. The mind is no longer producing ideas. It is producing flickers. As these flickers grow rarer, the quiet grows clearer. You begin to feel it not as the absence of thought, but as a state with its own presence, stable even, and surrounding every part of your inner world. It doesn't lead you anywhere. It doesn't deepen on its own. It simply exists as the default environment now. Your awareness rests inside that environment with a softness that feels aligned with everything else. The body's heaviness, the mind's minimal motions, the night's dim texture. Together, they create a quiet that doesn't ask for anything and doesn't expect anything. And in this quiet, you drift into a steadier rhythm, one where movement becomes rare, stillness becomes natural, and the next layer of the night begins to form just beyond the soft horizon of your awareness. The quiet inside you has settled into a nearly continuous presence so steady that even the faintest motion feels like a soft interruption rather than a return to thinking. Thoughts appear rarely now, and when they do, they rise as subtle flickers, thin, slow, almost hesitant, before dissolving without forming any direction. The quiet around them isn't empty. It's calm, full, and evenly spread across your inner landscape, creating a stable space where motion feels optional. Your awareness sits deeper in this quiet, not sunken, not fading, just resting closer to the body's slow rhythm. It feels anchored, lightly weighted, as though it has matched the density of the stillness around it. Every shift in awareness carries a soft delay, like your mind is moving in slow motion while sensing everything through a gentle filter that smooths the edges of each moment. Your body remains deeply grounded, its heaviness evenly distributed, steady and calm. Breathing has become the primary rhythm, now slow, unforced quiet. Each inhale feels like a slight lift into wakefulness. Each exhale feels like a soft return to the anchored layer beneath. The mind mirrors this pattern in small, nearly invisible pulses, drifting only as far as each breath gently allows. Inside this dim inner space, drifting no longer feels like movement. It feels like brief signals of wakefulness, small pulses that flicker and then flatten into the quiet without altering anything. Their presence doesn't create ripples. Their absence doesn't leave a void. Everything maintains its slow, even balance. The stillness surrounding all of this has thickened into a smooth, continuous field. It doesn't deepen or grow heavier. It becomes more consistent. Any thought that tries to rise with a slightly stronger contour softens instantly, its edges dissolving back into the neutral quiet. This softening requires no intention. The night handles it for you, smoothing every internal motion before it expands. The intervals between the flickers of thought continue to widen. Your awareness spends more time resting inside the stillness than it does observing any motion. These longer spans feel natural, expected, almost rhythmic in their consistency. In them, nothing pulls your attention. Nothing invites reflection. Nothing shifts your state. Everything simply rests in the same soft, dim equilibrium. The faint pulses of thought that do appear feel less like ideas and more like small echoes, subtle reminders that the mind is still awake, though minimally so. They drift for a moment, hover without direction, then dissolve before your awareness has to follow them. Even the act of registering them has slowed. You feel them only as brief touches, light sensations that fade before any engagement is needed. Your awareness now sits almost fully aligned with the resting body. It doesn't hover above it anymore. It rests within it, sharing the same slow, grounded rhythm. This alignment feels natural, not like merging, but like settling into the most stable part of yourself. In this aligned state, the distinction between mind and body becomes soft and thin, as though both are moving toward the same stillness at slightly different speeds. The mind sensing this alignment reduces its motion even further. The drifting thoughts become smaller than pulses. They appear as faint impressions, often without any form at all, more like gentle internal shifts than actual thoughts. The quiet doesn't suppress them. It absorbs them so smoothly that their appearance feels less like motion and more like part of the stillness itself. Inside this field, the night feels close and constant. It doesn't press in. It doesn't deepen into darkness. It simply surrounds your inner world with a uniform calm, removing any sharpness or contrast. The internal space feels compact, held, and softly insulated. There is no sense of distance, no sense of direction, only proximity softness, and an even quiet that stretches through every part of you. Occasionally, a slightly stronger flicker rises, maybe a familiar sensation, a small remembered impression, a subtle drift of awareness. But even these flickers are flattened by the night before they can shape themselves. They drift no farther than the previous ones. They fade just as quietly. The quiet remains undisturbed. Your breath carries more influence now. Each slow exhale seems to smooth the inner space. Each inhale seems to lift awareness only a minimal amount before allowing it to settle again. The mind follows these movements without thought, mimicking the pace of your breathing simply because nothing else inside you is moving. The inner landscape has become very small, very close, and very quiet. Everything stays within a near radius of your awareness. There is no wandering, no reaching, no drifting outward, only gentle internal pulses surrounded by long stretches of calm. This is the stage where the quiet becomes stable enough to feel like the natural environment of your wakefulness. It doesn't require attention. It doesn't require release. It simply holds you in a soft equilibrium that stays consistent from one breath to the next. And in this equilibrium, the mind prepares itself not by descending, not by shifting, but by reducing motion until only the tiniest signals of wakefulness remain, each one softer than the last, each one dissolving seamlessly into the quiet that now defines the hour. The quiet inside you now feels nearly seamless, a smooth, uninterrupted field that holds its shape without effort. Thoughts rise so lightly, they barely register as movement, faint impressions, thin pulses, soft internal shifts that appear and dissolve before they can form any trace of direction. The pauses between them have stretched into long, steady spans of calm that feel natural, stable, and quietly encompassing. Your awareness rests fully inside this calm. It doesn't hover above it anymore. It sits within it, lightly anchored and gently weighted. Not heavy, not sinking, just settled. Every sensation moves with a soft delay, as though your mind has slowed to match the body's deeper rhythm. Noticing has become a smooth, effortless process where each internal shift touches your awareness without needing to be followed. Your body remains deeply grounded, its weight even and steady. The breath moves through you in long, slow cycles, shaping the only real motion happening now. Each inhale lifts slightly. Each exhale settles a bit more, and the mind moves in small pulses that sync with that rhythm automatically, not by intention, but by the natural reduction of motion that comes in these hours. Inside this dim, softened inner space, drifting is no longer a pattern. It's a rare occurrence, a slight flicker of presence, a subtle spark of wakefulness. These flickers rise without contour, hover briefly in a near weightless state, then dissolve into the quiet almost immediately. They leave nothing behind. They create no momentum. They barely touch the surface of your awareness. The stillness around them has become thick, even, and consistent. It smooths everything, automatically softening any edge before it forms. Even thoughts with the faintest texture dissolve on contact with the quiet. There is no sense of suppression. It's simply the natural texture of the night, a quiet that absorbs movement rather than pushing against it. In the wider pauses, your awareness feels suspended, floating just above the resting body without tension. It doesn't anticipate the next flicker. It doesn't hold on to the last one. It simply occupies the calm, supported by the stability of your breath and the evenness of the quiet around you. The balance here feels complete, not because anything has merged, but because nothing is pulling in any direction. Every so often, a slightly more pronounced flicker rises, maybe a half memory, a faint sensation, a familiar impression, but even these dissolve before they can gather shape. They drift no farther than the others. Their presence doesn't alter the quiet. Their disappearance doesn't deepen it. Everything remains steady, uninterrupted. Your breath has become the central rhythm now. Each exhale smooths the inner landscape, releasing any small tension that appears. Each inhale lifts awareness only a little, and even that lift feels muted and gentle. The mind follows without thinking, adopting the breath's slow pace simply because nothing else is moving. The inner space feels small, close and softly insulated. No part of the mind tries to wander outward. No part searches inward. Everything stays near, held within a narrow radius where motion feels unnecessary. There is no sense of distance, no sense of depth, just a soft, near presence that wraps around your awareness like a lightly weighted blanket. As this space settles, the flickers of thought become even rarer. They appear as the smallest possible pulses, tiny signals that the mind is awake, but only in the most minimal form. They rise, hover for the briefest moment, then flatten into the quiet with no transition at all. Dissolution feels instantaneous, as if the quiet absorbs them before you can register their presence. Your awareness mirrors this reduction. It shifts less. It responds less. It holds the quiet more than it holds the motion. You sense your body's heaviness as the most constant element, the foundation beneath everything else. It doesn't pull you downward. It simply provides a stable anchor that your mind begins to settle around. As the minutes pass, the quiet becomes almost uniform. The boundary between awareness and stillness thins into something soft and indistinguishable. Awareness doesn't fade. It doesn't sharpen. It simply rests in a balanced, steady layer where there is very little movement left to observe. Occasionally, the breath creates a slight internal sway, the rise of the chest, the fall of the abdomen, and your mind shifts with it barely. These shifts feel less like thoughts and more like gentle internal signals, subtle reminders that the body is still awake. The mind echoes them without forming anything. They register, and then they pass. The drifting thoughts have reduced themselves to thin traces so close to stillness that they feel more like soft variations inside the quiet rather than departures from it. They drift in micro motions, appearing and fading with no distinction between beginning and ending. The night inside, you hold steady, not deepening, not thinning, just steady. This steadiness feels like the natural shape of this hour, the place where the mind prepares itself for what comes next by reducing motion until only the faintest signals remain. Your awareness, now nearly fused with the body's slow rhythm, stays calm through all of this. It doesn't track the flickers. It doesn't grip the quiet. It simply exists inside a balanced space where movement is minimal, pauses are long, and stillness holds everything in place. This is the threshold where thought becomes almost unnecessary, where the mind remains awake, but only through the smallest, softest gestures of motion. Each gesture fades quickly, leaving the quiet intact, uninterrupted, and continuous. And in this continuous quiet, you hover gently at the edge of the next layer of the night, not falling into it, not reaching for it, just waiting in the soft, slow rhythm that now defines your inner world. The stillness inside you now feels almost complete, a smooth, uninterrupted field where movement exists only in the faintest, softest traces. Thoughts rise rarely, and when they do, they appear as thin impressions that never fully take shape. They hover for a brief, gentle moment, then dissolve into the quiet without leaving even a subtle shift behind. The pauses between them are long, steady, and continuous, becoming the dominant texture of your awareness. Your awareness rests entirely inside this quiet. It doesn't float. It doesn't sink. It simply sits evenly weighted, aligned with the body's slow rhythm. Each sensation arrives, softened, almost muted, as though the mind has adjusted to the subtle density of the stillness around it. Nothing sharp forms. Nothing expands outward. Every internal shift feels delayed, gentle, and smooth. The body remains settled in its deep, stable heaviness. Breathing has slowed into a steady rhythm, long inhales that rise gently, long exhales that fall with even more softness. The mind echoes this rhythm, automatically producing faint internal pulses that match the pace of your breath. These pulses aren't thoughts. They're more like soft markers of wakefulness, small reminders that the mind hasn't disappeared, only reduced itself to the quietest possible motion. The inner space has shrunk into something very close, very compact. Not tight, not confined, simply reduced to the smallest comfortable range. Thoughts no longer wander or drift outward. They rise within this narrow space, move only a small distance, then dissolve into the surrounding calm. Even their rise feels optional, as though the mind only produces them when absolutely necessary to maintain its minimal state of wakefulness. The stillness that surrounds these movements is thick and consistent. It absorbs any edge before it forms, smoothing everything so fully that even the faintest internal shift feels like part of the quiet rather than a break in it. Nothing interrupts the equilibrium. Nothing stands apart from it. Everything moves within the same gentle texture. Sometimes a flicker with a hint of texture appears a fleeting sensation, a half-formed recognition, a subtle internal echo, but it dissolves instantly, its edges softening before it can create direction. These flickers feel more like variations in the quiet than actual thoughts. They appear flatten and vanish in a single smooth motion. Your awareness remains steady through all of this. It doesn't follow the flickers. It doesn't anticipate the next one. It simply rests in the long, stable pauses that now fill most of your internal world. In these pauses, you feel a kind of suspension, not floating, not drifting, just resting in a neutral, undisturbed stillness that holds your entire awareness without weight. Your breath shapes the internal environment more than anything else. Each slow exhale softens the space even further. Each inhale lifts your awareness by only a slight degree, and even that lift feels muted. The mind follows gently, not as a reaction, but as a natural alignment with the body's rhythm. There is no separation, now only a soft parallel movement between breath and awareness. The drifting thoughts have thinned into small, nearly transparent signals. They appear without forming dissolve, without fading, and leave the quiet unchanged. The mind isn't producing content, it's producing minimal pulses, the lightest proof that wakefulness still exists beneath the calm. This calm has become so steady that it feels like the default state of this hour. It doesn't deepen, it doesn't shift, it simply remains evenly covering everything inside you. The inner landscape has no corners, no distances, no layers, only a continuous field of quiet where the smallest movement happens softly and disappears instantly. Occasionally, you feel your awareness lower by a fraction, a subtle settling toward the body's rhythm. Not descent, not falling, just gentle alignment. It feels natural, inevitable, like two slow currents finally moving close enough that the small space between them begins to disappear. This alignment creates a sense of internal completeness. Not fullness, not emptiness, just completeness in the way everything shares the same calm. The thoughts that do rise feel like they're being generated from within the quiet itself rather than arriving from somewhere deeper. They appear flicker and flatten with seamless ease. Your awareness becomes almost indistinguishable from the stillness it rests in. It doesn't cling to the body. It doesn't rise to meet the flickers. It simply exists in a thin equilibrium that requires no effort to maintain. This equilibrium feels steady, smooth, and quietly expansive despite its small internal space. In this state, movement barely exists. Only faint pulses remain, and they fade quickly. There is no wandering, no drifting, no searching. Everything is close. Everything is soft. Everything is still. And as the quiet holds you in this subtle, balanced rhythm, you feel yourself approaching the next layer, where even these thin pulses begin to fade, and stillness becomes the primary motion of your inner world. The quiet inside you now feels almost seamless, a single, unbroken layer that supports everything without shifting. Thoughts rise so faintly that they hardly qualify as motions anymore. They appear as soft internal glimmers, small points of wakefulness that surface, briefly hover without form, and dissolve before they can shape themselves into anything larger. The spaces between them have widened into long, steady intervals where nothing moves, and the stillness holds its own weight with calm consistency. Your awareness rests fully inside these intervals. It doesn't sit above them or outside them. It rests within them, lightly anchored, gently balanced. The delay in how you sense each internal shift has extended even further. You don't react to anything immediately. Everything moves through a softened filter, as though the quiet has coated your perception itself in a thin, even layer. Awareness feels smooth, unhurried, and entirely content to remain where it is. Your body remains fully grounded, its heaviness steady but gentle. Breathing has slowed to the point where each inhale feels like a subtle lift, and each exhale feels like a soft surrender into the weight beneath you. No tension rises. No restlessness stirs. The body's rhythm is the most stable element of your inner experience, forming a steady foundation that the mind mirrors without needing instruction. Inside this dim, reduced space, drifting thoughts have become rare events. They rise not as ideas, not as memories, not as reflections, but as small internal pulses, like faint shifts in the quiet. Each pulse hovers just above the anchored layer of awareness before dissolving so smoothly that there is no distinct ending. These pulses don't move outward, they don't travel inward, they don't create sequences or echoes. They exist only as momentary variations in the stillness. The quiet around them thickens slightly, forming a gentle cushion that absorbs each pulse instantly. No ripple spreads, no tension follows. The night holds everything in a uniform calm that doesn't deepen or lighten, it simply remains constant. Even if a flicker rises with a slightly stronger presence, the quiet softens it, automatically smoothing its edges until it becomes indistinguishable from the stillness. Your breath continues shaping the internal rhythm. Each exhale lengthens the quiet. Each inhale lifts awareness only a fraction, just enough to sense a soft shift before returning to the resting weight below. The mind responds instinctively, syncing its faint internal pulses to this rhythm. Not through effort, through natural alignment, the kind that happens when nothing inside you is pushing in any direction. The inner landscape feels compact and near. There is no sense of distance to travel, no internal horizon, no direction for the mind to move toward. Everything exists within a small radius where motion feels unnecessary. The absence of wandering doesn't feel restrictive. It feels natural, as though the night has gently guided you into a space where the mind does not need to stretch beyond its immediate surroundings. Occasionally, a flicker appears that resembles something familiar, a sensation from earlier, a faint emotional contour, a soft echo of some earlier shape within you. But even these familiar flickers dissolve, immediately flattened by the quiet before they can develop. Their presence doesn't stir anything. Their disappearance doesn't leave a void. Everything resumes its even stillness. As more minutes pass, you begin to sense another subtle shift, not downward, not inward, but a shift toward softer presence. The awareness that once hovered lightly now rests closer to the body's center, sharing its weight and rhythm more fully. The distinction between mind and body becomes thinner, as though both are adjusting to the same slow pace. Your thoughts now resemble thin, quiet breaths. Small, subtle, momentary. They match the body's rhythm so closely that their appearance feels almost like part of your breathing rather than separate internal events. Inhale a faint lift of awareness. Exhale a gentle settling of everything into stillness. The quiet becomes clearer as this continues. Not in a bright way, in a clean way, as though any remaining internal noise has been absorbed by the night. It feels like the mind has entered a stable state where even the smallest motions are minimal, and the pauses between them hold more presence than the motions themselves. Your awareness floats through these pauses without drifting, without lifting, without lowering. It simply rests, supported by the body's steady rhythm and the night's consistent calm. Nothing inside you tries to shape thought. Nothing tries to interpret. Nothing tries to reach. Motion is so reduced now that even the internal flickers barely feel like movement at all. The internal space has narrowed into a smooth, soft core where everything remains close and quiet. The drifting thoughts appear only as tiny sparks of wakefulness, as if the mind is conserving its energy for the next stage of the night. They rise less often. They fade more quickly. Their presence feels secondary to the quiet that surrounds them. You can sense how the night has shaped this entire progression, the way darkness, silence, and stillness gradually pulled your inner world into alignment. The wandering has been replaced by hovering, the hovering by flickering, and the flickering by faint pulses that barely disturb the quiet. Now you rest inside a stable, continuous calm. The body is steady. The breath is slow. The awareness is anchored. And the mind produces only the gentlest traces of motion, each one dissolving into the quiet without resistance. You hover here in this softened equilibrium at the threshold of an even deeper layer, not reaching for it, not falling into it, just resting in the gentle balance the night has created around you. The quiet inside you has grown so steady that even the smallest internal shift feels like a gentle variation within a single continuous field. Thoughts no longer rise as distinguishable motions. They appear as soft internal hints, tiny suggestions of wakefulness that surface, briefly hover without form, and dissolve before they can make any impression. The spaces between these faint pulses stretch into long, smooth intervals that feel natural, balanced, and entirely unbroken. Your awareness rests fully inside this wide quiet. It doesn't float above it. It doesn't drift through it. It simply sits within it, lightly anchored, almost motionless. Everything you sense arrives through a slow, softened rhythm. Each moment passes through the quiet before it reaches you, filtered until it carries nothing sharp, nothing heavy, nothing that asks for attention. Your body remains the most stable element of your inner world. Its weight feels consistent, evenly distributed, and uncomplicated. Each breath moves in long, slow waves, gentle lifts, gentle releases, creating the only noticeable motion. And even that motion feels muted, softened by the surrounding stillness. The inhale rises lightly. The exhale settles calmly. The mind echoes this slow movement with faint internal pulses that follow the breath without thought. Inside this dim, compact inner space, drifting has nearly disappeared. There is no sense of wandering, no sense of reaching, no sense of direction. The mind produces only the smallest signals of wakefulness, each one lighter than the last. They rise, hover briefly in a near weightless way, and flatten into the quiet before anything inside you reacts. The quiet around these flickers feels whole now, thick enough to absorb every internal motion, consistent enough that even the smallest ripple dissolves instantly. Nothing expands. Nothing forms edges. Nothing lingers. The quiet is not a background anymore. It is the primary texture of the moment. As this texture stabilizes, your awareness begins to feel almost fused with it, not merged into blankness, simply aligned with the stillness, moving at the same pace. You register everything in slow, steady waves. A faint pulse rises. You sense it softly. It dissolves. You sense that too. Neither sensation pulls you. Neither requires follow-through. Everything passes through you with even timing. Your breath maintains the low rhythm that shapes the mind's remaining motions. Each exhale feels slightly longer than the inhale now, not in a deliberate way, but in a natural settling that happens when the body drifts deeper into rest. The mind follows this lengthening. Its faint pulses become slower, their intervals wider, their presence softer. The inner landscape feels very small, contained within a narrow radius where nothing needs to move far. Distance itself feels irrelevant. There is no sense of here and they're only a close, steady quiet that holds everything in the same soft layer. Occasionally, a flicker rises with a bit more clarity, a subtle echo of something familiar, a thin contour that resembles a memory or sensation. But even these clearer flickers lose definition immediately. The quiet softens them on contact, smoothing every outline until they become indistinguishable from the stillness. The pauses grow longer. They have become the defining feature of your inner world. In these pauses, awareness feels almost suspended, not drifting, not sinking, simply resting in a state that no longer requires active sensing. Everything is held in place by the quiet itself. Your mind produces fewer pulses now. They rise with hesitation, as though deciding whether movement is even necessary. When they do appear, they barely lift above the body's grounded rhythm. They drift only a fraction before dissolving. The dissolution is smooth, seamless, a gentle fading into the quiet without transition. Your awareness rests deeper with each moment. It settles closer to the body, matching its heaviness and warmth. The distinction between mind's movement and body's rest has grown very thin, almost like the two are moving in a parallel stillness, separate but nearly synchronized. The night shapes this entire equilibrium. It doesn't deepen the quiet, it maintains it. The consistency of the calm becomes the environment in which everything functions. No motion becomes strong enough to disrupt it. No flicker grows sharp enough to alter it. The stillness remains uniform. You can sense that the mind is preparing to shed even these faint pulses, not by force, not by descent, but by natural reduction, the same slow progression that guided you from drifting to hovering to flickering, and now to near stillness. Every inhale lifts awareness only slightly. Every exhale lowers it a minimal amount. These shifts feel like the last gentle movements before the mind settles into a deeper state. They don't push you downward. They don't invite you to lighten. They simply move with a rhythm that matches the quiet perfectly. In this softened space, the difference between movement and stillness fades. Everything feels like a single continuous presence, body, mind, breath, awareness resting within the same slow, dim calm. Thought rises only as the faintest trace, now a nearly invisible gesture that dissolves before it can be recognized. Stillness sits beneath everything smooth and uninterrupted. And as you rest here, held inside this steady, balanced quiet, you approach the next subtle layer of the night one, where thought becomes almost imperceptible, and the quiet becomes the place where your awareness naturally settles. The quiet inside you has become nearly continuous, holding its shape with such steadiness that every small internal shift feels like the lightest variation inside a single unbroken field. Thoughts no longer rise as movements. They rise as tiny internal signals, faint points of wakefulness that surface for a moment, hover without form, and dissolve almost instantly into the surrounding calm. The pauses between them are long, smooth, and unfragmented, forming the natural rhythm of this hour. Your awareness rests completely within these wide pauses. It doesn't hover above them or observe them from a distance. It sits inside them, gently anchored, sensing everything through a softened filter that makes each internal shift feel delayed and quiet. Nothing sharp enters, nothing heavy lingers. The quiet shapes every perception before it reaches you, smoothing each moment into the same slow, even contour. Your body remains deeply grounded. The heaviness has settled fully, not as weight you must carry, but as stable support beneath everything inside you. Breathing moves in slow, gentle waves, long inhales that lift slightly longer, exhales that sink calmly. The breath has become the central rhythm, now the quiet tide that your awareness and your faint internal pulses follow without effort. Inside this dim, narrow space, drifting has almost disappeared. The mind no longer produces motion in the way it did earlier. What remains are faint pulses, small, near silent sparks that rise only to show that the mind is still awake. They hover for a moment, then flatten into the stillness without disturbing anything. No direction forms. No pattern repeats. Each pulse appears as a minimal gesture, then dissolves into the same calm that surrounds it. The stillness around these pulses has become uniform. It does not deepen. It does not lighten. It simply remains steady, absorbing each tiny flicker before it can take shape. Even slight impressions, half sensations, faint outlines, subtle echoes of something familiar dissolve on contact with the quiet. Their edges soften instantly. Their contours vanish before they can settle into your awareness. Your awareness feels nearly fused to this consistency. It doesn't try to rise. It doesn't try to sink. It rests horizontally across the quiet, matching its pace and thickness. Everything you sense arrives through this alignment, not sharp, not bright, but muted, and even as though the quiet itself is doing the sensing for you. Your breath continues, guiding the internal rhythm. Each exhale lengthens the stillness, spreading it more fully through the space within you. Each inhale lifts awareness only slightly, a small, gentle movement that immediately returns to the anchored layer beneath. The mind mirrors these minimal shifts, rising and settling in pulses so faint you feel them only as gentle variations in the quiet. The landscape inside feels small and almost borderless. There are no distant edges, no internal directions, no places to reach. Everything exists within a close, compact radius where motion feels unnecessary. The absence of wandering does not feel restrictive. It feels natural, as if movement itself has recognized this hour's quiet and stepped aside. In these long spans of stillness, your awareness begins to feel suspended, not floating upward, not sinking downward, simply resting without needing to adjust. The stability has reached a point where nothing inside you moves with intention. Even the faint pulses that rise do so with hesitation, as if deciding whether movement has any purpose at all. When these pulses do appear, they are softer than before. They have no contour. They hover only for an instant, then dissolve as though the quiet absorbs them the moment they surface. Their disappearance leaves the stillness unchanged, smooth, and unbroken. The boundary between mind and body continues to thin. Awareness sits at the point where both rhythms meet the breath's slow motion and the mind's nearly still presence. It doesn't feel like merging. It feels like coexistence inside a calm that requires nothing from either side. As more moments pass, the quiet becomes the primary state. You no longer notice the reduction of thought. You notice the continuity of the stillness. It spreads through you, evenly holding each breath, each minimal pulse, each moment with the same soft neutrality. The mind recognizing this consistency produces only the smallest pulses now. They feel like internal echoes rather than thoughts, faint shifts that arise without content and disappear without trace. They mark the presence of wakefulness, but only faintly, as if the mind is slowly preparing to let go of even these small gestures. The night sustains this equilibrium. It doesn't push you deeper. It holds you steady. The quiet becomes the environment, the texture, and the rhythm. Everything inside you, breath awareness, the last traces of thought settles into the same slow, dim balance. You rest here in a layer of quiet, where movement is minimal and stillness is natural. The body is steady. The breath is slow. The awareness is gently weighted. And the mind produces only thin, soft pulses that dissolve before they can shift your state. In this continuous calm, you hover at the threshold of the next stage, where what remains of wakefulness becomes even lighter, and the quiet becomes the container for every motion, every breath, every softened thought. The quiet inside you now feels almost uniform, a single steady layer that holds everything in place without shifting. Thoughts rise so faintly they barely distinguish themselves from the stillness. They come as soft internal tremors, the lightest signals of wakefulness, appearing without shape and dissolving before they settle. The pauses between them have stretched into long, smooth spans that feel like the natural environment of this hour. Your awareness rests entirely inside those spans. It no longer feels like something separate, observing the quiet. It feels entwined with it, moving at the same slow pace. Every internal sensation arrives, softened, delayed, and lightly cushioned. Nothing sharp reaches you. Nothing heavy lingers. The quiet has become a filter that smooths every edge before it can form. Your body remains deeply grounded, its weight even and steady. Breathing moves with a slow, balanced rhythm. Long inhales that rise just enough to register, long exhales that sink gently back into the anchored heaviness beneath. This rhythm is now the primary motion inside you. Everything else, awareness, faint pulses of thought, the shape of the inner space follows that breath automatically. Drifting no longer happens. The mind has reduced itself to minimal pulses, small, delicate signals that hover briefly, then fade without direction. These pulses don't feel like thoughts. They feel like tiny markers that the mind is still awake, though only barely. They lift slightly with each inhale, flatten with each exhale, and never travel beyond a small internal radius. The stillness around these pulses is dense and even. It swallows every flicker, instantly keeping the entire inner space uniform and undisturbed. Even the slightest impression, a faint echo of something earlier, a soft contour of a remembered feeling dissolves as soon as it appears. Nothing develops. Nothing expands. Everything returns to quiet with the same smooth consistency. Your awareness feels deeply aligned with this stillness now. It's not drifting. It's not sinking. It's resting steady, present, and softly weighted. Every moment arrives as a gentle wave that touches awareness, then folds back into calm. This is not a descent. It's a settling, an internal equilibrium that doesn't require effort to maintain. The breath shapes this equilibrium. Each exhale stretches the quiet further, smoothing the inner space until it feels uninterrupted. Each inhale lifts you slightly, but only enough to confirm that you're still awake. The lift is brief. The settling is longer. And the mind mirrors this pattern perfectly. Inside this narrow inner landscape, distance no longer exists. There is no sense of traveling toward or away from anything. There are no internal edges to approach. Everything stays near, contained, and soft. Movement is no longer part of the mind's instinct. The instinct now is quiet, held by the night and echoed by the body. Occasionally, a slightly clearer pulse rises, barely more defined than the others, a faint shape that might hint at something familiar. But even that shape dissolves instantly. The quiet doesn't push it away. It simply absorbs it so completely that it becomes indistinguishable from the stillness. Your awareness rests even lower, now matching the heaviness of your body almost exactly. The line between body and mind has thinned into something gentle, not merged, not blurred, but softly parallel, moving in the same slow rhythm. The breath ties them together, holding everything at the same pace. As more moments pass, the pulses of thought grow rarer. They arrive less frequently, hover for shorter periods, and dissolve with greater ease. The quiet surrounding them becomes more dominant, not as emptiness, but as presence, a calm that holds weight without pressure. You can sense the mind preparing to release even these final pulses, not by dropping into darkness, not by closing down, but by reducing movement until only the faintest signals remain. This reduction feels natural, the continuation of the same gradual process that brought you here from earlier drifting. Your breath is now the clearest element within you. Inhale, a slight rise. Exhale, a slow settling. Everything else, awareness, faint inner motion. The shape of the quiet moves according to this rhythm. There are no other currents, no other impulses, only this slow, consistent cycle. In this softened equilibrium, the internal space becomes nearly motionless. The mind continues to produce tiny signals, but they are so light that they feel like variations inside the quiet rather than departures from it. They rise without effort. They dissolve without notice. And you remain here, steady anchored, held inside a continuous calm that forms the threshold of the next layer, where even these faint pulses may begin to fade, and where the quiet becomes the ground beneath every part of your awareness. The quiet inside you has reached a point where it no longer feels like something surrounding your awareness. It feels like the medium you're resting in. Every part of your inner world moves inside this calm, and even those movements are faint, softened, and brief. Thoughts rise as the thinnest internal signals, small tremors that appear without contour and dissolve before they can gather the slightest shape. The stretches between them are long, smooth, and steady, forming an uninterrupted field where almost nothing stirs. Your awareness rests fully inside this field. It doesn't sit above it or beside it. It's in it, gently anchored, lightly weighted, moving in the same slow rhythm that everything else follows. Each internal sensation reaches you through layers of softness, as though the quiet has wrapped itself around every moment before it arrives. Nothing sharp touches you. Nothing urgent appears. Every experience is flattened into the same gentle tone. Your body remains deeply grounded, held in a stable heaviness that feels supportive rather than demanding. The breath moves slowly in long and even arcs, a slight rise on each inhale, a longer settling on each exhale. This rhythm has become the only consistent movement inside you. The mind no longer tries to follow anything else. It mirrors the breath's small shifts automatically. Drifting has fully disappeared. What the mind produces now are only minimal pulses, tiny, nearly invisible notices of wakefulness. They rise for a moment, hover at the surface of awareness, then disappear, as though absorbed directly into the quiet. They do not expand. They do not travel. They do not repeat. Their presence feels like the final form of thought before stillness takes over. The quiet around them remains dense and evenly spread. It absorbs each flicker so completely that no trace remains. Even the faintest impressions dissolve instantly, a small sensation, a familiar echo, a thin contour of earlier thoughts. Nothing forms, nothing lasts. Everything is smoothed into the same calm consistency. Your awareness rests deeper inside this steadiness. It doesn't drift downward. It simply settles more thoroughly, aligning itself with the body's grounded rhythm. You sense everything from within this alignment: the slow breath, the weight of your limbs, the faint pulses that rise and dissolve. No effort is needed. Awareness sits quietly synchronized with the slow pace of the internal world. The inner landscape feels extremely close, almost dimensionless. There is no sense of up or down, no sense of distance or direction. Everything exists within the same soft radius body, breath awareness, and the last faint motions of the mind. Movement has become so minimal that even variation feels like part of the stillness. If a thought tries to rise with a slightly stronger outline, it softens before it reaches any recognizable form. The quiet flattens it, immediately absorbing its edges until it becomes indistinguishable from the backdrop. These brief attempts do not disturb the calm. They're simply faint ripples that disappear faster than they appear. Your breath influences everything now. Each exhale extends the stillness. Each inhale lifts awareness only slightly, just enough to confirm the presence of wakefulness. The lift is brief. The settling lasts longer. And the mind follows these shifts with pulses so small they feel like tiny echoes rather than deliberate motions. The boundary between mind and body has nearly faded. Awareness rests in the middle, touching both without needing to distinguish between them. The body holds steady beneath. The mind produces quiet signals above. All three settle into the same slow rhythm, gently overlapping within the calm. The pauses dominate this stage. They stretch without interruption, forming continuous spans where nothing rises at all. In these spans, your awareness feels suspended in an even silence, not drifting, not falling, not changing, simply resting in a stillness that needs no maintenance. Any pulse that rises now feels softer than ever. It doesn't lift. It doesn't shape itself. It simply appears as the smallest trace of wakefulness, then dissolves before any part of you reacts. These pulses no longer feel like thoughts. They feel like the last natural gestures of the waking mind. And as the quiet holds you more fully, everything inside you begins to move toward a state where motion itself becomes almost unnecessary. The breath continues its slow rhythm. Awareness rests at its center. The mind remains awake only in the gentlest form, producing tiny pulses that flatten into the quiet with immediate ease. You rest here, steady, balanced, and held inside a calm that feels complete but not heavy. This calm forms the soft threshold before the final stage of the night, where even these faint pulses may begin to fade, leaving only the smooth, continuous presence of breath body and awareness resting in the same quiet space. The quiet inside you has settled into a single continuous layer that feels almost motionless. Whatever remains of thought rises only as the faintest internal signals, tiny soft pulses that hover for an instant before dissolving into the stillness without leaving any trace. These pulses are no longer events. They're barely even shifts. They appear as the smallest gestures of wakefulness, then flatten instantly absorbed by the calm that now fills the entire inner space. Your awareness rests fully inside this calm. It doesn't sit above it. It doesn't drift through it. It is inside it, lightly anchored, moving at the same slow and steady rhythm that defines everything happening within you. Each internal sensation arrives through this layer of quiet softened until nothing feels sharp, heavy, or urgent. You receive every moment as a gentle variation inside a wider stillness. Your body remains deeply grounded. The heaviness feels complete, even and entirely stable. Breathing moves in long, slow arcs, a slight rise on each inhale, a longer settling on each exhale. This is the only clear motion left. Everything else follows it, not by intention, but by natural alignment. The mind mirrors this rhythm in pulses so faint they feel like echoes rather than thoughts. Those pulses now hover at the threshold of stillness. They appear less often, dissolve more quickly, and carry no contour at all. They resemble soft internal shifts, nothing directional, nothing extended, nothing forming into shape. They rise because some part of the mind remains awake, but their presence is minimal, nearly transparent against the quiet. The stillness absorbs each pulse immediately. It flattens every edge before it forms, smoothing anything that tries to rise into the same gentle equilibrium. Even faint impressions, something remembered, something sensed, something lightly familiar, lose their definition instantly. The quiet is not something you're sinking into. It is something holding you, reducing motion simply by being consistent. Your awareness rests deeper in this steadiness. It stays low, close to the body, aligned with its rhythm. Every inhalation lifts awareness by a small margin, the smallest amount necessary to register wakefulness. Every exhalation returns it gently to its anchored position. This rise and settle is the only internal pattern left, a small oscillation that keeps you connected to the moment without engaging the mind. Inside this near motionless landscape, distance no longer exists. The mind does not wander. It does not hover. It simply produces brief internal pulses that rise and fade within the same close radius. No edges, no paths, no directions. Everything remains inside a compact field where stillness is the natural state. Occasionally, a slightly more noticeable flicker rises, a small contour, a thin outline of something familiar, but even these are softened before they can be recognized. The quiet flattens them instantly, restoring the same smooth consistency. Nothing lingers. Nothing develops. Nothing returns. Your breath maintains the slow rhythm that holds everything together. Each cycle stretches the quiet further until the space within you feels almost seamless. The mind mirrors these cycles, quietly drifting in micro motions that dissolve before they can shift the state. These motions are not thoughts. They are simply tiny confirmations that you remain awake in the softest possible way. The boundary between mind and body has nearly disappeared. Awareness rests at their meeting point, matching both rhythms without needing to distinguish between them. Body-breath awareness, all three move in the same slow, steady arc. No part of you strains toward anything. No part pulls away. Everything rests in a shared stillness. The pauses between pulses feel complete now. They expand into long, undisturbed spans where nothing rises at all. In these spans, your awareness feels weightless and anchored at the same time, supported from below, softened from within, untouched by anything that resembles motion. When a pulse does appear, it feels like the gentlest ripple inside the quiet. It lifts, slightly hovers, for the briefest moment, then fades before you can follow. The quiet absorbs it so naturally that its disappearance feels like a return to the default state rather than a loss. This is the final shape of the night's progression, not the end of wakefulness, not the beginning of sleep, but a stable equilibrium where motion has reduced itself to near zero. Thought becomes barely perceptible. Awareness becomes gently diffused. The breath becomes the only movement that remains clearly defined. Here you rest in the softest possible balance. The quiet isn't deepening, it's complete. The mind isn't descending, it's still. The body isn't sinking, it's settled. Everything exists within one slow, continuous rhythm, smooth enough that nothing inside you needs to adjust. And in this continuous calm, you remain steady, present softly awake at the quietest point of the night, where even the smallest flicker dissolves, and where stillness becomes the natural ground beneath every moment